Natasja Nielsen, she is the co-founder and former CTO of Secureframe, a company that basically saw an opportunity to automate the cybersecurity credentialing process and blew up in the process of doing just that. But before Secureframe, she was at Amazon. She was an engineering lead for stealth robotics and automation projects at AWS and Lab 126. Show of hands if you know what Lab 126 is at Amazon. Okay, a couple of you. The rest of you get to learn today. She also led a cloud engineering team for Iron Ox, a robotics farming and automated farming company. Before she did all that cool stuff, though, out in the world, she was sitting here just like you. Not for one semester, not for 1 year, for like 4 years in a row, she came to this class. Blew my mind when I found that out. And you know what the coolest part, arguably, about it is? She only paid for it one time. The rest of the time, she actually came and just sat in and enjoyed the speakers. That is like super dedicated. I guess she found a lot of value in it. Outside of doing 407, though, she also co-founded Shift. Show of hands if you know what Shift is, Shift co-creator space on campus. Okay, you'll learn more about that today, too. She was the Startup Career Fair director for Empowered. She helped get MHACs up and running. And she did all that before she graduated from COE here in 2015. And now she's left our beautiful state of Michigan. She lives out in LA with her partner, where she's plotting her next big thing. Please help me welcome Natasja Nielsen.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right. Hey, everyone. Hope you're all doing well this Friday. Thank you for having me out here. I'm so excited to be not just back on campus, but back on this stage specifically. Like Eric said, Entrepreneurship Hour was a very special part of my Michigan experience. I came, I think, every single year that I was out here, whether I was actually enrolled in the class or not. But I didn't start my journey at Michigan, super pumped about entrepreneurship. And so I would love to tell you today a little bit about that journey and how I ended up starting Secureframe. I think on the outside, starting a company can seem like a really glamorous thing, especially when it goes well. And look like a very linear journey. But for me, at least, it definitely was not. When I first came to Michigan, I wanted to study chemical engineering. And I loved it. I loved the classes. Took the intro to computer science class that all freshman engineers had to take. And ended up falling in love with the idea that you could build something from anywhere with just a computer and an internet connection. That was such a magical, special idea to me. And along with that and taking Entrepreneurship Hour kind of just as a filler class when I first started out. I'll be honest, I didn't really know what entrepreneurship was coming in, nor did I think I ever wanted to start a business. And it was part of the speaker series and hearing all of the speakers' incredible stories and journeys over the years that inspired me to look at the world in a different way, to see that you could, that the world was made up of things made by individuals who are maybe not so different from you, who had gone through their own failures, sometimes many, many failures along the way. And so upon realizing that I wanted to start a company, I thought, I immersed myself in entrepreneurship on campus, spent a lot of time working with the CFE on some of the things that Eric mentioned, so Startup Career Fair. We started Shift to kind of harness students' creativity and bring people together to collaborate across disciplines. And upon leaving Michigan, my original plan was to just fully be in the startup ecosystem. I was obsessed with startup culture, to say the least. And I was like, I will only ever work at startups. I will never do the big company thing. But I would like to at least get one of those names on my resume. And so went to Amazon in Seattle, did an internship there. And that brings us to our try. I thought I'll try the startup side of things, I'll try the corporate, and then it's like back to startups for me. And so when I went to Amazon, I realized just how little I actually knew about software engineering and building products. I was absolutely floored by the quality of the people that I worked with, and just all of the things that go into every single simple feature that you see when you go to like checkout with your products on Amazon, for example. There was the team that I had interned with, it was a team of 20 people, and these 20 people, their entire job was launching the little coupon button that you click when you get like a little 20% discount or something in checkout. And it was amazing to me that there were 20 people behind just that single button. And so I decided that I had a lot more to learn before I jumped directly into working for a super early stage startup. And so I decided to rejoin Amazon full time. I spent the next few years there, started playing around with ideas for my own products and companies on the side. Which brings us to the failures that I had along the way. So I spent a lot of time around really incredible individuals, kind of honing my engineering and product skills. Amazon was an incredible place to do that. It's very feedback oriented. And after a couple of years, I thought, okay, I have all these ideas for these things that I care about in the world. I cared a lot about food and nutrition, so I had ideas for like new packaged foods that I wanted to see out in the world, and then a lot of ideas on like consumer retail, and so like clothing, branding, etc. But I didn't do myself the justice of actually putting a lot of these ideas out into the world and giving them the chance to flourish. I did a lot of very introverted things, like writing out my business plans and even going so far as to like build websites for a lot of the ideas that I had, like talk to manufacturers, but I didn't actually talk to customers or potential customers or investors, and really run these ideas by people who had expertise in the areas I was looking at. And after a while of kind of struggling with this, I thought, you know what, I'm actually just not ready to start my own company. And so I looked for joining an early stage startup in some of the areas I was super interested in. And so one of those areas was ag tech. I thought, we need to change our food. Maybe we don't do that via consumer packaged goods. And so I found a company called Iron Ox that was building indoor automated farming via robotic farmers. And so they were building huge robots that would move plants from their original grow trays to through all of the stages throughout their lives. And I thought this was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. I was like, this is the future of farming. The company was doing hydroponics, which is where you grow the plants in water instead of soil. And by doing so, you can control exactly how many nutrients are in the water and grow these plants that are really big, really nutritionally dense. They taste amazing because they're so nutritionally dense. And I was like, this is it. This is what I'm gonna spend the rest of my life on. And when I first got to the company, it was amazing. There were tons of opportunities for growth. The vision and mission for the company were very aligned with where I wanted to go. But one thing that I completely missed while evaluating the company and thinking about my time there was looking at work culture and the different ways of how work gets done. So before this, I had spent a lot of time at Amazon, and they have a very peculiar culture, a very specific way of doing things. And I realized pretty quickly at this startup that, there was a bit of a cultural mismatch. And so kind of with my tail between my legs, I thought, okay, it's time for me to exit this startup. And I'm gonna go back to Amazon. Some of my previous teammates had started an organization to build Amazon's first in-home robot. So I thought, okay, I'll go do that, continue my robotics work, and we'll kind of reevaluate from there. After I was back at Amazon working on robotics for a while, I still had this urge to build something. But I wanted to be a lot more intentional with it this time around. So I spent a lot of time evaluating different industries and really reaching out and talking to a lot more people, potential customers, other founders. I think I spoke with, over a 1-year period, over 100 different founders who were at various stages of building their products, and really just interrogating them about their process, why they were building what they were building, what they thought the biggest downfalls were, and eventually thought, I keep delaying this process and thinking like I'm not ready. Let's just jump into it. And so one of the conversations I had was with my co-founder, who I ended up starting Secureframe with, and we realized we had this shared love of automating manual human-led processes that could be more efficient. And so that is how we ended up taking the risk to start Secureframe. So Secureframe is not in the sexiest space that one can imagine. It's automation of security compliance. But the existing way that people were going about getting their compliance process done was super manual. And so engineering and product teams would put in hundreds of hours every year, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on this compliance process, super laborious, super boring for the individuals who had to do it. It wasn't the best use of their time. And so I found a lot of excitement in that. However, there was a lot of risk involved into going into this space. We felt pretty good about the market in terms of customer need and willingness to pay. But there were already several competitors in the space. They were taking a much more manual approach to the process, but they had a lot of really great customers on their rosters already. So going in, we were a little bit of like an underdog, definitely coming in a little bit late, and we almost didn't go down the path that we did for that reason, but we thought, let's take the risk, let's jump off. Neither my co-founder or myself had a background in security or compliance, so that was a bit of a risk as well, and we really just threw ourselves into learning that process. Throwing ourselves into that process, we raised a lot of money in the beginning, and the reason we wanted to do that instead of taking a more like bootstrapped approach was because we had such strong conviction about the market, and we wanted to try to catch up to our competitors as quickly as possible. And so we raised money, and we were closing our round just as the COVID pandemic was kind of like taking off. So I think first week of March, we had term sheets out, and that was when the market started to get a little bit crazy. A lot of investors were actually pulling out from term sheets. Fortunately, we were able to sign. We had all this money in the bank right as a lot of cities went into lockdown. And we went ahead and moved forward with hiring as quickly as possible for our early core team, but trying to keep it lean and then build out that early product. And so in that first year, we weren't sure what was going to happen as far as like the overall like economy. And so we moved ahead cautiously in terms of taking a pretty frugal approach, but we were very aggressive with our product development. And so in the first year, we grew the team to 10 people, our first $1 million in revenue, acquired our first like about 100 customers or so, and then raised our Series A, and after that point was really the big inflection point. And so I think within the next quarter after that, we took the team from about 10 people to 40, acquired, we were, I think, like tripling our customer base every couple of months. And yeah, and so I wanted to share a little bit about getting there, and because I think from the outside, you can look at Secureframe's journey and the numbers on paper and just see kind of the straight upward trajectory, but really it was this process of evaluating many ideas over time, kind of throwing them in the trash, and even as we built out the early product, we had tons of iterations of our initial like dashboard and offering that we ended up scrapping. So, thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you. You want to grab a seat?
Yeah.
Let's do it. So, I'm listening to you talk about all this, and you're going through the notions of how you go from Amazon over to the startup, then to saying, hey, I want to do my own startup. Undoubtedly, there had to be aspects that when you were at Amazon, you looked at that culture, to your point that you talked about being iterative and kind of constantly designing. What is it that you took away from there that you were like, you know what, I need to bake this into my startup's DNA. I need to bake this into the culture. There's not a question of whether it should be, it has to be.
Yeah. I love that question. That was something that my co-founder and I were very intentional about when we started Secureframe. And so before doing that, in kind of the year before that, I outlined what are the things about work cultures that I've been a part of so far that I want to take forward, and also what are the things I don't. And one of the principles that is kind of baked into Amazon's culture in particular that I love is there are two pieces: bias for action, and then also constant feedback. And so externally, Amazon doesn't have the most amazing reputation. It can be an intense environment, and that's definitely true, but part of the intensity is this kind of idea of constant feedback. And so you're constantly, there's this like expectation to constantly be both giving and receiving feedback, and the purpose is not to be like critical, but to really draw out the best experience and product for the customer. And I really loved how well they baked that into their culture, and so that was something I really wanted to bring into Secureframe. I think it results in the best product and experience for the customer, but also really helps individual employees grow much more quickly within the company.
I can imagine. I'm thinking about you taking that into Secureframe and then going from 10 employees to 40 employees within a quarter. Speaking to a room full of students who are probably hoping to be hired by a Secureframe-esque company going forward, how do you ensure that cultural DNA around direct feedback, customer-centric viewpoints is included in your hiring process? How do you ensure new employees coming on appreciate and uphold that same value?
Yeah, I think it's a hard thing to interview for. We all like to think that we like feedback, but I think we all like to receive and give feedback in different ways. There are a lot of different styles. And so we try to test for that a bit while interviewing. And one of the ways that we do that is just by asking about people's experiences with receiving feedback, or even asking directly, how do you like to receive feedback? And a lot of times we have candidates, come through who've never been asked that question before. But if you have a really good manager, I think, then they will ask you those kinds of things, like how do you like to work? How do you like to receive feedback? And so we do all of that in the interview process.
In addition to students prioritizing their ability to know for themselves how they like to receive feedback, how it's constructive for them, what other skill sets should they be developing as future startup employees? When you look at it and you think back to when you were here, what do you wish somebody would have told you?
Yeah. Within the realm of startups in particular, I think scrappiness and just willingness to have that like bias for action we talked about. It can be very intimidating earlier in your career. You come into a totally new environment. It's very different from being in your classes in school, and so it's easy to kind of just sit back and soak things in, or soak things up. But I think just like deciding to put yourself out there and jump into new projects. So if there's, in a big company, things tend to be more structured, but in a startup, and a lot of times like projects end up going to the people who just volunteer themselves for them, or just proactively see a problem and take it up. And so I think getting familiar with or getting used to taking that kind of action.
Taking that action, jumping into projects, isn't something you just did in your professional career, though. When you were here, you were doing that, and you were taking opportunities that otherwise weren't available or weren't present to you in a formal way, and you just kind of made them your own. Outside of course, that being fun and that being, at the time enjoyable, what long-term benefits did that serve you to be engaged, to be active when you were on campus, to seek out and create new opportunity for yourself?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things I worked on at Michigan alongside the CFE were really kind of my first entrepreneurial experiences. So starting Shift, and even running the startup career fair was kind of a mini startup in its own, or we tried to run it that way. So I think things like that are a really great opportunity to practice leading and figuring out your leadership style, problem solving within a group. It's very different, working on, I think, a group project in a class and problem solving together versus working on a project that's out in the real world and has some consequences and other people involved. So I think throwing yourself into those kinds of things definitely helps prepare you for being in a full-time work environment where everyone's you have your own responsibilities, but everyone really is trying to work together to like move in the same direction.
Yeah, absolutely. In that notion of preparation that you seem to constantly be looking out beyond the horizon, trying to anticipate what's there, what opportunities might be able to be created to get yourself prepared for them. How did you become prepared, or how did you feel confident enough to put yourself in the position to be the CTO of a company that's raising actively all of this money, is now employing dozens of folks? How did you know that that was going to be something that you could pull off and do? Or did you know?
I didn't. And so that was kind of one of the big lessons. By the time that I was leaving Amazon, or had decided I was going to leave Amazon for the second time, I was like over my own mental blocks to the point where I was like, I don't feel like I'm ready to start a company. There are so many things I don't know. But what I had realized throughout my career thus far was that I was never going to be able to like prepare enough for that. And I think it's really valuable to have the opportunity to be able to learn from people who are way more experienced than yourself. But after a certain point, you have to just take the leap yourself, and you'll kind of learn some things along the way.
Like a poster or something about that?
Yeah.
Here, yeah. And now you said that you're not a risk taker. This is not something that comes naturally to you. But when I look at your rap sheet and I look at everything that you've accomplished, it looks like someone who's pretty happy to take a risk and willing to kind of go out there. How have you evolved that skill set over the years, both when you were at Michigan here and then in your professional life? How have you learned to become more comfortable with risk, or what tools and techniques have you used to demystify the fears around taking a risk?
Yeah, I love that question. I think just progressively doing things that are progressively more like intimidating to you, and kind of figuring out exactly where your boundaries are. And that doesn't mean repeatedly throwing yourself into things that are maybe not your area of strength, but just continuing to like push out the boundaries and the boundary of like kind of your worldview. And so, like you were saying before, like being involved in a lot of activities on Michigan's campus definitely helped on that front. I was super shy and introverted when I got here. I could never have pictured myself leading a company, let alone even like a team. And so I think those are really good lower stakes areas to kind of like practice. And especially on a campus, you have, there are so many different clubs and groups and ways to like test out different interests and see how that fits in. And then even outside of school, not everything has to be business oriented. There are a lot of like activities and groups you can join related to your interests, even if it's just going to like something like this. Like if you're interested in biotech, going to like a speaker series in your community, pushing yourself to go to like events and network, for example. A lot of people don't like networking, and I think it's kind of if you can like continue to put yourself in these uncomfortable situations, then you'll get progressively like more comfortable with it.
To those, show of hands, who doesn't like networking or public speaking? You guys are being bashful. To those who don't, to those who that doesn't come natural to, as someone who was a chemical engineering major, right, when she came in, and then going to computer science, and then in a CTO role, how have you learned to become more comfortable, or what practical advice would you give to someone who's not comfortable with networking, public speaking, the more social aspects around startup operations?
I would say, practice, and such a, I hate to say that because it's such a easy thing to say and it's much harder to actually do in person. But I think also putting yourself in the kinds of networking and social situations that you find stimulating. So you don't need to go to every single event, or you don't need to go to like massive events if that's super, if that sounds not fun to you. Like find something you're genuinely interested in, and then also I think preparing ahead of time, like what do you want to get out of it? Who are the kinds of people you want to meet?
Why are you going?
Why are you going, exactly, yeah. And so I used to do, for some events, if I could figure out who like some of the attendees were, I would do my own research beforehand and figure out like, okay, who are the specific people I want to talk to and what questions do I have for them? And not for the purpose of like checking off the box of like, okay, I established this relationship, but really like, what do I want to know from this individual?
Establishing a process and a system for how you went about going to do that.
Yeah.
Is that something that Secureframe would then try to teach employees coming in?
I think so. Establishing processes in general, or like networking.
Okay. I'm thinking about the time that you're in Amazon, and then of course I was talking to the students before you came out about 126, and you go from being at Amazon to then being in this niche group. How did that opportunity get created? How did that kind of come to be, and what value did that end up producing for you? And if you wouldn't mind giving a sense of what 126 is.
Yeah, so Lab 126 is Amazon's hardware research lab, and so most of Amazon's hardware products have come out of Lab 126. So it started with the Kindle and all of the Kindle devices after that, but then the Alexa devices also came out of there, as well as some of Amazon's robotics that is used in their warehouses. And the question was, how did that opportunity come
how did that
about?
opportunity come up, and then kind of what value did that produce being over there?
Yeah. So when I first started at Amazon, I was kind of just down to work on whatever. I just wanted to be surrounded by smart people. And I loved AWS's products in particular. So I went to AWS originally, where I worked on networking and infrastructure automation, which was super low level, like automating processes on devices in Amazon's data centers, so where all their servers run. And I didn't love the networking aspect of it, but I loved the hardware aspect of it. I loved working with devices and automation. And so I had reached out to a bunch of people who worked at Lab and was kind of like, what are you working on? And just kind of finding out the layout of the different teams. And there was a team that I had spoken to, and full of super senior individuals. They had all like started and sold multiple companies. One of them literally invented Android. And I was like, I have to work with these people. And they were like, we're not hiring junior engineers. And I was like, okay. And so I kept talking to people. And then 3 months later, they actually reached back out and were like, hey, we actually want to open up one position. Do you want to move out to San Francisco? And so I was like, yes, I will do anything.
So that persistence of allowing yourself to be a self-advocate for what you wanted, what you were looking for, communicating that to others and being consistent with it, obviously really kind of paid off with a new pathway for you on that. I'm thinking you go from that to then going over to the automated farming, to going back to Amazon and then doing your startup. Along that way, you had mentioned you weren't familiar with the exact process that was developed, or the need for the process that was developed at Secureframe. Neither was your co-founder. Having gone from the experience where you were trying to create open doorways and create opportunities to pursue passions within Amazon, to then seeing an opportunity that you weren't necessarily familiar or passionate about, looking back now and talking to students who might want to be founders themselves, would you recommend they go for something they're undoubtedly passionate and know? Or would you recommend they just try to get an opportunity that's going to give them the experience regardless of whether the passion is there?
This is such a tough one, and I've heard a lot of conflicting advice over the years on this exact front. And I think the answer is that it depends on the individual. I think for some people, going with what you're passionate about is absolutely the move. Otherwise, building a company or branching out in general is already difficult, and it's a lot easier when you really care about the area you're going into. But I also think there's a lot of serendipity that comes from putting yourself into areas that you don't know anything about. And so, I wouldn't, without Lab and my AWS experience, for example, I would have never made the hardware connection and learned that I really liked working on inefficient processes. If you had asked me as a student, I would have never said something like that. But at the same time, there are also people who are like, well, I have no idea what I'm passionate about. And I think it takes a few experiences to start to really draw out those patterns. So the answer is, it depends. I think if you already have something you're passionate about, definitely explore that. It might not be where you necessarily end up, be open to new possibilities. But if you don't know, then I think that's also, it's fine to just work in an area that's like intellectually stimulating or.
How do you stay motivated when you're working in an area that you're otherwise not passionate about? How do you stay engaged and chipping away at what's otherwise an incredibly tedious and difficult time building a company?
Yeah, that's hard. Personally, I try to find something about what I'm doing that is interesting, and that will usually kind of like propel forward, and you end up kind of like drifting in that direction. And so, I'll give an example. At AWS, I didn't love the networking aspect. I think if you were a networking engineer, that is one of the best places in the world to be, is working on their data center operations. But for myself, I was much more interested in product and software automation in general. And so, I would do my work day to day, but then I would use my free time to read a lot of like architecture docs that were just available.
Typical Friday night stuff.
Yeah, just fun free time activities. And that was that made it really fun to me because I was like, I don't care about some of the networking aspects, but I discovered that I loved software architecture through doing that. And so if you can find either within the process a piece of it that's interesting to you or like something adjacent, that helps. But I do think it's also worth knowing when to get out of something and move toward what you have now discovered is more interesting to you.
So what's that going to be for you next?
I am currently working through some ideas in a couple of different spaces, one being biotech, another being crypto, which seem like very different arenas, but with my focus on like process automation, I see in both spaces a lot of opportunity for additional infrastructure and automation, and so that's kind of what I'm working on now.
You talked about reaching out to all these founders and trying to have all these conversations. I get the sense that your hunger to know more about a huge variety of seemingly unconnected fields creates almost a matrix for you to understand where the intersections are, where big opportunities might lie ahead. And those are the two fields where you feel like maybe those are coming together for you now?
I think so, and I think now especially there are actually you are starting to see these fields intersect a bit more. So there are like DAOs that are raising funds for specific biotech initiatives, for example, and so you might think that two areas of interest of yours are like not interconnected, but there are always ways to kind of make them come together.
Yeah, I can imagine. Students, you were phenomenal in submitting so many questions, so I want to make sure that we grant some time for that. I think our PAs are going to be, they're already up there. Look at them, smiling, happy, 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 T-shirts in hand, because we love y'all wearing CFE swag. So if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. We've got one down here. We've got a couple over there. I'll let the runners come over to you. Go wherever you want, Rashika and Sebastian.
Thank you. My main question is, you worked on robotics and then you worked in software and automation at Amazon. So why is your inspiration why you joined your current company?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when we went to raise for Secureframe initially, that was a question we got from investors a lot for both myself and my co-founder, since security compliance was certainly not our background. And so this goes back to what Eric was asking about, what do you do when something is not your area of interest? When my co-founder and I started talking about the idea for Secureframe, I was not really interested at all. I was like, yeah, it seems like there might be something to solve here, but security compliance is not really where I see myself spending the next 10 years of my life. And as we started to dig into it more and talk to potential customers, I actually saw a lot of parallels between what customers needed in security compliance and what I had built previously at Amazon. So I'd worked on automating manual processes through software, and like robotics is a lot of automation through software and hardware, right? And so a lot of what we were doing there was taking in tons of different inputs, learning from those inputs automatically with software, and then taking action with software. And that's essentially what we did with Secureframe and security compliance. Instead of people going through all these manual processes, we would automate those with software. And so there were actually a lot of parallels between my previous work and what we ended up building.
Thank you. Fascinating. Rashika, I lost you in the crowd somewhere. Oh, there you are. Oh, there's another question. Go ahead.
When you were talking to those hundreds of founders in that 1 year,
Can
did you
you
notice
just speak up just a little bit? What's that?
Testing.
There you go.
Okay. Talking to those hundreds of founders in that 1 year, did you notice any patterns in the responses you got or the advice you got?
Love that question. There was a lot of conflicting advice. But I think one of the common threads was around just getting your ideas out into the world and getting early and fast feedback on them and continuing to iterate and grow from there. So I think that's something that's talked a lot about in entrepreneurship, but is actually very difficult to put into practice, especially if you tend to be more introverted or like kind of a perfectionist. Like there are a lot of things that can kind of get in your way. And so that was another common thread with a lot of the founders I talked to, which was your idea and product and team are super important for your overall success, but also understanding yourself as a leader and your own like mental blockers is also a super critical part of the process.
Other questions? No, over here.
Do you think you would have made a company kind of like Secureframe if you weren't at Amazon, or did you always have that entrepreneurial mindset that you would do something even if you didn't go to the company that you went to?
Good question.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Probably not, or at least not as like process oriented. I think before working at Amazon, I only had experience as like a consumer. And so a lot of my interest in tech and in general was around products that were like very consumer facing. So the products we all know, use, and love, like Instagram and Snapchat and Airbnb, for example, like you can see how they work as a product and kind of think about like what they might be like as a business. But my time at Amazon taught me that I really actually love back of house operations and thinking about these like systems, whether it's systems of people, systems of like processes, machines, et cetera.
Great question. So just to clarify, you probably would not have started a company without going to Amazon first. It's for their help more.
Oh, yes.
Attendance quiz.
Okay. I think I would have started a company, but I think it would have been very different and probably more consumer facing.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarity. Other questions? There you go. Just flip that up.
Hello. So I read in articles about you before class that Secureframe currently like focuses on the most common certificates, and then I also read that you wanted to create like your own custom certificate that like people could only get from you. So I was wondering how you decided to like come about that, because I feel like it's a good differentiation between like Secureframe and other certificate companies. Like, are you still planning on pursuing that, and like how are you going to get people to like start using your new certificates?
Wow, you really did your research. That is a great question. When we first started Secureframe, one of the things that we were super excited about was the generally kind of low bar in the security compliance space. So a lot of teams just wanted to kind of check the box of like, we have GDPR compliance, we have HIPAA, we have SOC 2 compliance. But a lot of those teams also genuinely wanted to become more secure in their practices. They didn't know how. And so every compliance framework has its own pros and cons. But what we thought going in was that the bar could be a lot higher for these protocols. And so that was why we wanted to create our own to help companies like really, truly become secure. And that is currently still the plan. And a lot of companies in the space are now working on their own protocols as well. So I'm excited to see where we end up with security compliance overall.
Raising your Series A, how much of it was presenting yourself as like the founders versus presenting your idea? Because I know a lot of VCs are like, you're also investing in the founders and the people of the company.
Yeah, it definitely is, and even at the Series A stage. So I think when we went to raise our Series A, we had a lot of great traction. We weren't sure where things were going to go with COVID and the general economy, and we were very lucky in the sense that some of that actually worked in our favor, as a lot of companies tried to go online or like online only versus like in person. They had to move all their operations online and improve their digital security. And so that really helped our business explode, and just the broader market of security compliance became very interesting to a lot of investors. So a lot of big investors wanted to find like their kind of horse in the race. And so that was definitely part of it, and I think made our process easier. And then part of it was, yeah, getting to know us as founders, getting to know our existing team. We tried to keep the early team lean pre-Series A. But I think by the time you get to Series A, a lot of investors do want to see some sort of traction. And so one thing we did was send to our existing investors, but also potential future Series A investors, a monthly kind of recap of what we had accomplished and a lot of our internal metrics, and we were super open with those. And so by the time we went to go raise, we had a lot of these relationships already kind of established.
Yep. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. This has been super interesting. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about going from your MVP to your first paying customer and how funding played a role in that whole process.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So we were super lucky on this front. Before we started raising, we had spent a lot of time talking with customers. My co-founder had experienced the frustrating process of trying to get compliant in startups he had been in previously, and then I had a glimpse of some of that from the corporate side while at AWS, and how AWS would help their customers get compliant. And so we did a lot of that discovery. We raised very quickly, and we were able to do that partially because other people had kind of already validated the market. And so we had put together like a really quick design of what our platform would look like just like the UI. And we shared that with investors in our deck, but we also shared that with potential customers just to get their feedback. And a lot of these customers, before we had even raised money, saw the like mock-up and thought it was actually the platform, and were like, when can we get on this platform? Like, can we start tomorrow? Because we wanted to be compliant yesterday. And so that was a really great signal for us, where we were like, okay, shoot, we don't actually have the platform built, but people want to buy it like now. And so basically, we kept those relationships warm, and we tried to build the first part of the platform as quickly as possible. And so to the point where we were literally, so the process for getting compliant is there are a bunch of different like steps to it. And so on one day, we would be building step 1 and onboarding those customers, and we would have like 2, 3, 4 like mocked up on the website, but they didn't actually work. And we just told customers like, oh, you have to check in with your customer success rep before you get moved to the next step. But it was really because we were literally building it like on the fly as they were going through the process. So it was a very stressful but rewarding time.
I have time for one more student question. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I feel like you guys like have like a very targeted like focus, I guess. It's like a very niche product. So do you have like any plans for like expansion or like future like, yeah, I guess like areas of expansion?
Yeah. So the long-term vision for Secureframe is to actually bring greater security to companies, and the compliance piece is just one aspect of that. So I left the company, and so the direction, might change, but the idea is like compliance is just one piece of this pie, and it serves as a great kind of entry point for building trust with customers. And the long-term goal is to build a whole suite of tools and services that help companies secure their operations.
That's great. So one last question I want to ask you for their benefit, and hopefully we can talk a little bit more afterward, and I'll send you guys out the notes on this that she provides via announcements. But when you think back to going to all the different events you went to here, participating in all the different things, what is the one resource, event, opportunity, whatever it might be here that you can access as a student that you can't as an alum, and you're like, wow, that would be so amazing. I wish I had that still, or access to that.
The one resource.
Or opportunity, job,
Opportunity.
event,
Yeah.
whatever it might be.
Just like the more general concept of going back to like the feedback thing and just like help in general. As a student, everybody wants to help you. And I was told that as a student, and I still didn't take enough advantage of this. But it's so true, and there are so many brilliant faculty members and staff around campus who have just incredible experience throughout their careers, who want to just like help you grow, give you feedback. And so taking advantage of that and like meeting your professors and meeting other people who work around all of the different colleges. And
while you're a student, you are like a charity. Soak it up. Soak it up. Everybody wants to help you. That's it for class. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Oh, that's totally fine. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Great questions. Hi.